Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Hey, today we're just talking about other forms of bias. So even though you've correct or selected a good way of random sampling or like a good sampling method, there's still some forms of bias that can persist and ultimately affect the outcomes of your survey or study, whatever. So hey, the other forms of bias, first one we'll talk about is undercoverage. Undercoverage. So this occurs when a group from the population is just merely underrepresented in your survey. So even though you randomly selected from the population, you've still excluded a group from the population. I don't even know if I really need to write anything down on that one. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Undercoverage, a group in your sample is underrepresented when compared to the population. Back in 1936, there was a presidential election between, I think the guy's name was Alfred Landon, maybe. Alfred Landon ran against FDR. It kind of happened like in 2016 as well, where Hillary ran against Donald Trump and polls got it wrong. So the same thing happened in 1936. It's just pretty interesting of why in 1936. To get their list of people to poll, they were randomly selecting from licensed vehicles. So the only people being selected in their surveys were people that had registered vehicles. I should say registered, not licensed, but so they underrepresented. They were randomly selecting people from a population, but they entirely missed everybody that did not have a registered vehicle that could still vote. So undercoverage is certainly a big deal. And like I said, it's just one more form of bias. Another form of bias is, pretty simple one as well, is a non-response. Non-response. So the email, phone call, whatever goes out, phone call goes out, but you get no response in return. So these polling agencies might be calling tens of thousands of people, but a good majority of them are going to see the unknown email, or it might even just be a filter where it goes straight to your junk email. In terms of phone calls, maybe you see like some type of 1-800 number and you're like, yep, just hanging up right off the bat. So it is hard to randomly select and get responses from people. When you're unable to get a lot of people to respond, that's called non-response bias. The third other form of bias, this one would be just a bit different from non-response. It's called response bias. Response bias. I think sometimes you might even see this one get called incorrect response bias. So this is when questions are systematically answered incorrectly. So I think a good example of response bias would be, remember like back on the first week of school, I had a survey for everybody to fill out. And it was just pretty standard questions like, what's your favorite music? How tall are you? What's your favorite sport? Things of that nature. Now, if I would have included on that survey, how often do you, two words there, how often do you drink alcohol? I imagine that, especially being it was like first day of school, still never even met each other or anything, you're gonna see that question and say, yeah, definitely gonna lie. Putting 0 there, even though that might not be true. So this would be a question that leads to response bias. You're just gonna choose probably the socially acceptable response, not necessarily gonna answer the most truthful way. So the last form of bias is called wording of the question. So this one, there's actually two different ways that this bias can come up. So the first way is the order, like thinking about, end of school, you get to send a survey about your classes, and the first question says, what is your grade in the course? What is your grade in the course, right? And then right after that question, it asks you, do you recommend to other students? Do you recommend to other students? So this will lead to bias. Whenever you answer this first question, what is your grade? If you end up answering with an A or a B, you're probably feeling pretty confident in completing the class. So then when you get this next question, do you recommend this class to others? You're going to answer it based off of what you put before it. So one way that wording of the question works is actually the order. The order that the questions were asked can make a difference on how you respond. So the other way that wording of the question works is, it leads you into answering a certain way. So maybe you're concerned about the food choices at PV, and you set up a survey, you randomly select based off of the stratified sample. Anyways, eventually you get to this point, you ask the question, how likely are you to support better food options in the cafeteria? So when you see this, very clearly going to lead to bias. How likely are you to support better food options in the cafeteria? You're probably going to say, yeah, definitely. Let's get some better food. I don't mind. Where you want to take away as much bias as possible within this question. Maybe instead of saying better food options, how likely are you to support different food options in the cafeteria, or like a different food vendor or something? You want to take away as much bias as possible. So that will do it for this video. Just keep in mind that even if you have a good sampling method, be it an SRS, stratified, or a cluster, even systematic, bias can still arise in these 4 forms: undercoverage, non-response, response, and the wording of the questions. All right, y'all. See you in class. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.